right, Mike. Well, I don't know if you've been running into this quite a bit lately with clients or not, but fees, commissions, agents, listing agent, buyer's agent, commission fees, kind of been a topic of discussion of late. Can you give us some insight as to why that would be?
Boy, did we have confusion over that or what?
Yes,
So
we did.
would it be all right if I kind of built some history around this, Aaron?
Absolutely.
Okay. Um, so a couple years ago, there was a class action lawsuit against the National Association of Realtors and several of the large franchises around the country and large companies, and the issue lied with commissions, and the crux of the conversation was: is there disclosure about who's paying?
Mm.
Does the seller know who they're paying? Does the buyer know who's paying? Is there any conversation around it? And this class action lawsuit originated in Missouri, where they didn't have buyer representation agreements at the time. Fortunately for us in Idaho, the impact of the changes that resulted from this class action lawsuit, we were already pretty much in alignment. Though the conversation did adjust some, Idaho, because of the forms and the approach that we've taken, we're pretty much in alignment. So I'll just explain historically how commissions were handled. So we used to have what was called cooperative compensation, cooperative brokerage. So we had our multiple listing service. Inside the multiple listing service, the commission being offered to a buyer's agent was published. To step back from that, to get to that point, there was a seller representation agreement. And the flow of money, the flow of commissions moved through the listing brokerage.
Mm.
So let's say that you had your home listed with your broker. You signed a representation agreement that might have said, we can't really talk about commission rate, but we'll say that here was the commission. This is what it was.
Mm-hmm.
Then out of that commission, that broker was to share a certain percentage to the buyer's agent. The issue in the states that had troubles was there was no conversation with the seller and the listing agency about how much would be paid to the buyer's agent.
Mm.
In Idaho, our forms have said for nearly a decade what the total commission was and what would be paid. And so when the seller signed that representation agreement, it was in the contract already about what that fee was going to be. But the fee itself flowed through the listing company, the listing brokerage. Now, because we handled it separately inside our contracts, when it came to closing in Idaho, the commissions were split. You would see what commission was going to the agent working for the seller and what was going to the agency working for the buyer. Those were two separate numbers. So everything about our process was separate. But the flow of the money, again, it was from the seller. All the funds flowed up to, think about a triangle. So here in the lower corner, we've got the seller. The money would flow to the listing brokerage, and then the buyer brokerage would get paid from the listing company. So that was the technical legal flow of the compensation, keeping in mind that our contracts and even our closing settlement statements had those numbers separated, like they were both coming from the seller, because that's what it looked like on the seller agreement. So in the class action lawsuit, in the settlement, we want to make sure that we understand that this was a civil action, not a law. So people will say, oh, I hear the law changed.
Yeah.
There's right. That's what
Yes.
they say. Well, it's not a law. So it's a practices thing. It's a practice. Nobody landed in jail or anything like that. It wasn't about that. It's a civil action, a lawsuit, just like one of us suing somebody else. It's a civil action. It
Sure.
just happened to be a group suing another group. So in the settlement, there were just different things agreed to. But now what happens is, inside our contracts, the obligation now is between the seller and the listing company. And then inside the purchase agreement, the buyer is now negotiating with the seller inside the purchase agreement of what compensation the seller would pay to their agent. So now, instead of the money, again, I want you to visualize this triangle. Instead of the money going like this over to this agent, now the money is going from the seller up to the listing agency and from the seller directly to the buyer. So that this has been an interesting thing. When this class action lawsuit happened, they thought, well, overall commission fees charged will go down. There'll be pressure on commissions, and commission rates will go down. Well, the opposite's what's happened, because now conversations are happening. People are talking about it and establishing their fees before they get started, and the actual average commission nationwide since this settlement occurred has actually gone up.
Hmm.
So that's the fundamental behind the change. And so now the question goes to the buyers, right?
Yep.
So now the buyers are wondering, it's because they hear every state was different, right? We need to remember this. We have people coming to us here in Idaho from other states where it was different.
Sure. Yeah.
Their practices were and are different. So, for one, cooperative compensation is still legal, although there's nobody in our local market that I'm aware of that offers that. It's all handled through our purchase and sell agreements. And so now, when you sign a buyer representation agreement, that representation agreement, before you find your home, and we'll back up a step in a second, but before you even make an offer on your home, you've had a conversation with your agent about what their compensation is going to be and how we hope that's going to get paid. And that's, I think, where you started this question, right?
Yes, this is a question that we're getting a lot from, well, I'd say sellers and buyers, Mike, to be honest with you. Yeah, a lot of sellers that I've worked with, had the pleasure of dealing with, they were asking a lot of questions around it, and they said exactly what you just got done saying. They thought that there was a law change. They thought that transactions in real estate completely are different. And I've had to go through explaining what you just
Mm-hmm.
got done explaining, which you do a much better job at it than I do. I will say that. Of fundamentally, nothing's really changed with what we do, but what has changed, especially for the states that might not have had the forms that we've had in place for a while, is now there's just actual written disclosures with full transparency so
Yeah.
that people know exactly where funds are coming from and where things are going. Is that what you're saying?
So to tell you, so we have a thing here called the law of agency.
Mm.
In Idaho, it's called the law of agency. For decades, we called it the blue brochure.
Yeah.
This was the legislature, so this was law. This was a part of what we were doing that was statute, that law, and is today. But that law since 1989, 1989, this is how far back it went. Since 1989, it has been that upon the first substantial contact, that a real estate agent is supposed to go over this agency, which is just talking about who works for who. Am I representing you as a buyer, or am I just helping you?
Yeah.
You're a customer. You're not a client. And having that definition, so that conversation was supposed to be happening. I'm not going to tell you it always happened. Under the terms of the current agreement that exists, that as a part of the settlement, that is actually now in place. And it went a step further and says that basically upon that first substantial contact, before I can show you a home, I'm supposed to have some understanding with you about what my expectations are, which would relate to you with how am I getting paid?
Mm.
Am I getting paid for showing you this house? Are you going to sign a representation agreement to have me represent you through the entire process, whether you buy this house or another home? But the point is, it's created the conversations with, and that's the great thing. Out of a lot of people in our world thought this is going to be disaster, which actually,
Doomsday.
yeah, it was really all this doomsday conversation, when all it's done is raise the level of our professionalism. So now for a buyer, the conversation sounds like this when we're putting this together, which actually has always been the case with Idaho forums. I want to make sure everybody understands that we were supposed to be getting these representation agreements signed long before people found their homes, because we were beginning to act like we were representing them.
Yeah.
And acting like you represent them without having the legal right to do so is a bit of a problem, right? Your attorney would never start,
Correct.
right,
Yep.
without having
Yep.
an understanding they're representing you. So it's the same thing. Agency attorneys have that term, and so do we. The conversation should have always been that, hey, this is my expected compensation, whatever it is, and hopefully the seller's going to pay it.
Yep.
But if they don't, the good news is they're probably at least going to pay a good portion of it, which only leaves you a little bit left to pay,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
So it's kind of like insurance.
Sure.
If you want to,
Yeah.
you go in to do your insurance, insurance is going to pay this much, and you have your copay or whatever your participation is in that medical bill. It's the same thing in real estate. The seller is going to pay at least a portion of it, if not all of it. And what happens is there's three different ways that this can happen. I have had a couple buyers who have said, we're not going to ask the seller to pay for that. We'll pay your commission. And this is what it's going to be. So it never becomes a part of the purchase agreement.
Wow.
When that buyer offers on your listing, what do you think they do with the offering price?
Probably coming a little bit under because they're expecting,
Uh,
hey, I'm fronting this fee, so I'm going to maybe
exactly.
undercut you a little bit.
Whatever, they're going to reduce what they're offering on that house by what they're paying in commission. That's going to be the least of their starting point. So this is like the chicken or the egg. Who really pays? When you buy anything, who really pays? When you go, right? I mean, seriously,
Yes.
who's really paying? When you go buy a car, do you think that salesman is working for free?
I'm sure it's not a hobby.
Who's paying him? The dealership or who buys the car?
Sure.
It's built into literally every product that's sold in this country. It just happens that way with accountants, attorneys, dentists. I don't care what it is. Services have to be paid for.
Right.
And so that's really the conversation we have here. So now a buyer can pay for it. A buyer can negotiate through the purchase and sell agreement to hopefully have the seller pay for the commission. If the seller's only willing to pay for a portion of the commission, then it leaves you with the benefit of only having to pay for part of it as the buyer. And that's the conversation. So it doesn't really increase the amount of cash that comes out of a buyer's pocket versus what it should have been before all this happened. It's all the same.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. Let's play devil's advocate here. Let's flip it to the listing side. Okay, so we're
Yeah.
going to a listing appointment. We have some sellers that are, let's just put a commission out there. They're saying, you know what, Mike, we're going to give you a 3% that you're asking for on the list side. However, I just want to let you know that I don't plan on offering this same compensation to a buyer's agent, and I'm only willing to do X amount, but that amount is lesser than the amount they're paying you, whatever that percentage is. Can that work against them? Is that smart? Would you advise that? What say you on that?
I wish there was a really straightforward answer to that. So the general practice within the agent world, so again, I'm showing one of your listings. I've got somebody who's looked at it for a second time.
Okay.
And they're becoming interested in your property. One of my questions to you should come to be, so is the seller willing to pay compensation for the buyer's agent?
Sure.
You answer the question,
Maybe. Just write an offer and we'll see.
write an offer and we'll see. So now I tell the buyer that. Now we'll say the buyer's interested they've got plan A, plan B, plan C. They're all pretty close together. So that was answer one. Now I go to another listing agent and I ask that listing agent the same question. Is the seller willing to pay compensation? And that agent says,
yes, they are.
yes, they are. And then I say, great. Are they willing to pay this? And you've already got an agreement with the seller. You know what the seller's going to pay. And you say, yes, they are. And now I go to the third agent, and say, well, buyer's interested in your property. Are you offering compensation? That agent then says, yes. And then I say, okay, what are they willing to compensate? And we'll say that amount is less than what my compensation agreement is with the buyer.
Which is on the buyer's representation that you have with your buyers.
Correct.
Okay.
So we've got three different scenarios. We've got actually a fourth one exists out there. The listing agent says, you say, no, they're not willing to pay. So now we've got four scenarios,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Now I go to the buyer. The buyer's got a choice of being on the hook for 100% of the compensation agreement, a portion of it, none of it. Does that influence what the buyer's decision is going to be?
I know it would if I was the buyer.
Yeah, it is the question of the day.
Yeah.
If it's a cash buyer or anybody like that, or if there's only a portion of it being paid, the next question is, does it influence how the buyer will negotiate with the seller? It's hard for me to tell you no, it won't. In our practice, we realize that it definitely does it does influence a buyer's decision.
Sure.
If they're If it's a clear preference, I mean, there's a big gap between A and B in how much they care for a house.
Yeah.
Maybe the answer changes a little bit. But most buyers today, as agents, we coach people, don't just like one home. Make sure you keep at least two. So if one doesn't work out, you still got the other one, and you don't have to start all over again.
Sure.
I prefer it if they've got three. I want them to talk in terms of, yes, I could live here, here, here. We could be happy in all three places. Okay, let's pick the one that you'd like to offer on. And that just creates a better dynamic and a greater advantage for the buyer, and they're not feeling like they're being held hostage by the rest of it. But anyway, that's the rest of that compensation conversation. So it again, there's there it's no different than what the conversation should have always been. It should have always been the same conversation, because if I signed a representation agreement with you before you found your home, in the old days when the commission was published and I knew what was being offered, the conversation's still the same. This seller is not offering full compensation. You'll have to pay this balance, and this is what that would be. And it would have been a part of the conversation and negotiation at that time as well. All the same thing.
So what you're also saying is it's very important to bring things up at a certain point.
Yeah.
Throughout working with a
Yeah.
client versus maybe bombarding them later at the end when
Right.
there's not clear transparency up front.
Yeah. So the big thing, again, the upfront conversation and making sure that that conversation is had. It's an easy conversation to kind of glance over.
Sure.
But if you can have that conversation with your agent, whether you're buying or selling, having that conversation with your agent and being able to have open, candid conversation about that speaks a lot to the relationship that you're going to have with your agent, and making sure that they can really, truly represent your best interest, negotiate on your behalf, whichever you're doing, buying or selling.
Okay. So fundamentally, overall, things are business as usual. However, what has changed is we no longer publicly, and I say publicly, but in the MLS present the percentage up front. So that is what has changed.
There's no it's not published anywhere. We
Okay.
have to ask as agents, we have to ask to find out what that looks like.
Okay. So that was a policy change that we saw.
Yeah. Important thing too to understand, when I call you, you don't have to answer my question.
Sure. Yes, that's a good point.
You cannot. But again, I've got to communicate that. If you're my client,
Yep.
I have to communicate that to you as the listing agent declined to disclose whether the seller is willing to pay compensation or not. Now, the positive part of that conversation is it's just a part of the negotiation. You don't end up having to buy a house anyway. So if we go in and on the offer we're asking the seller to pay the compensation,
Yes.
and the seller's not willing to come to the number that you asked for, if you gain a level of comfort in that number, however we negotiate it, either through raising a price to take care of compensating it, or you have the availability of funds to pay for the difference, or you just decide it's just not going to work.
Sure.
And then you just move on.
Which I think is the risk that you do run if you're a seller. It behooves you to be willing to go down the path of, hey, I'm most likely going to need to compensate this buyer's agent. Understanding, I used the analogy earlier that I like. So you go into a car dealership, and what you're basically saying is that you've never been to a dealership where you had to write a check to purchase the vehicle and then a second check for the sales rep that helped you, but everything was
Right.
kind of built into that one price. You wrote the one check and you got the product and services that you
Yeah.
wanted.
In fact, think how it would affect you. Let's carry that story further.
Okay.
I go to a dealership to buy a car, and the dealer says, "We don't pay the sales agent. You have to pay him. Period."
Mm.
I mean, this conversation comes up, and you're the one as the buyer, you've got to pay the commission because the seller won't. Are you going to do that? Or are you going to find another dealership with another car that you would love to buy? Really, gosh, I really do not like putting cars and homes
I
in the
know.
same
I know.
in the same arena, but the concept would
Right.
be similar.
Correct.
And there's always that issue of negotiability. Commissions are always negotiable, right? We always
Sure. Absolutely.
that's always part of the conversation. But I will just ask you, I mean, every now and then somebody calls me and the first question they ask is, "What do you charge?"
Mm.
And every time somebody asks me that, you know what I want to ask them? When you call your dentist, is the first thing you ask them how much you're going to charge me to clean my teeth? Is that the first question you ask me? Or how much you're going to charge me for a root canal? Or your doctor? How much you going to charge me? Is that your first question?
No, typically not. Usually it's, hey, when do you have some availability?
Yeah, it's just so a purchase is, whether you're buying or selling, it's probably in the middle of the biggest financial thing going on in your life. I mean, it's just sitting right there. It's this big beast sitting there, and the moment you enter into the conversation, that you're wanting somebody to represent your best interest, you want to indicate to them right out of the chute that you're not interested in taking care of their interests. It's just not a relationship that's going to match up.
Right.
Nobody works for free.
No. And people, especially in our industry, want to partner with someone
Yeah,
and be helped guided, counseled, advised properly, and with full transparency.
yeah,
Right.
that's
So
the
I
deal.
think that's
Yeah.
the importance of finding the right agent. Right. Well, Mike, I appreciate your time and explaining that. That's a lot of information we just covered. And ultimately, if you're someone that's out there on the sidelines who's kind of just waiting around, seeing what's happening, how this impacts you, if it does impact you, just please feel free to reach out to us. Give us a call or visit the link below, and we're more than happy to talk to you. And we look forward to talking to you then.